Okay.
Consider teshuvah, you're just going to buy Torah.
Let's do some Pesach preparation and go through some ideas from the Haggadah, because 'tis the season, as they say. Amen. So let's talk about the question aspect of the Pesach Seder. Okay? We know that we open up the Pesach Seder. One of the early parts is we introduce 4 sons, which represent 4 children. And each one of these children have something to ask at the Pesach Seder. Very interesting, okay? And each one of them, we usually take, the youngest child. I'm the youngest child in my family, so for many years I was the one who had to stand on a chair in front of all my family and make this declaration of Manishtana in a very high-pitched voice, while everyone looked at me and oohed and ahed, right? And so began my performance in the Haggadah realm. And I still to this day run a large communal Seder, so I guess that's when I got my early training. This is an ancient tradition, of course, as the entire Haggadah. But these Arba Banim are not mentioned explicitly, but they are referenced, as it were, inside the Torah. So who are these 4 children? Why are we obsessed with them? Why do they get such prominent positions? And why are we focusing on kids anyway? We don't see this anywhere else. Where do we see that we invite our children to stay up all night at the Sukkah on Rosh Hashanah? We don't tell kids, okay, stay up, we're going to give you a gift. You stay up all, late night, Yom Kippur. We don't do this. Shavuot, okay, you want to stay up, very, very nice. If not, not. Here, there seems to be this focus and fascination when it comes to children. And actually, there are 2 Torah mitzvot we're going to do at the Pesach Seder. One of them is eating matzah, and the other is reading the Haggadah, Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. By the way, it is a Sipur, is a story. It's not a tefillah. It's not a prayer. There are prayer aspects to it, but it's actually a Sipur, which means the person reading it and the people listening to it should understand what's going on, which is why you should probably do it in your own language people understand. It's a story. Don't tell a story in a language no one understands. And that's especially to children. Ve'higarat el bincha, says the Torah. This telling over of the Pesach story, the Sipur, is actually a Torah mitzvah. And actually it's hinted at in the word Pesach. The word Pesach means to pass over, because God passed over the Jewish homes in order to kill the firstborn Egyptians, Mitzrayim, in Mitzrayim. However, the word Pesach is actually made up of 2 words. Pesach, the mouth speaks. There's this speaking aspect to the Pesach. So you've got to talk it out. It's not a lecture, it's not a class, it's not some deep. It's got to talk very clearly to the level that young children understand what you're saying. It's not meant to be some deep Kabbalistic, dissertation that's happening. It's meant to be clear and understandable for young children. If you have a 5-year-old, you talk to a 5-year-old. If you've got a 10-year-old, talk to them. If you've got a 20-year-old, it's all the same. Talk to them at their level. So introduce 4 types of kids. So who are these 4 children? Well, let's start with the first one. First one is the Echad Chacham, the wise child. The wise child. And what is this wise child? If the kid's so wise, why does he have questions? He should have all the answers, right? Why is he exactly, what's wise about him that he's sitting there and he's asking questions? So the answer to that must be that wisdom, chokhmah in Judaism, because this is a chacham, means having questions and want to know the answer. Knowledge, that involves knowing answers. But wisdom is something very different. We all know people who are very, very knowledgeable and yet not very wise. We know people who are very successful in many areas of life and yet they are lacking much wisdom. They're 2 separate realms. They're mutually exclusive, as we say. So wisdom comes from the desire to learn and to know more. And how do we identify that? Asking questions. Okay, that's the historic way that we, the Jewish people, learn Torah. Ask questions. Or the Gemara is questions and answers. Right? You have a kasha, you have a teretz. That's the way you learn Gemara. That's the way real Torah learning isn't what we're doing now, giving a class. Sitting in front of it. You have to do it sometimes because, the teacher has to give over information. But really it comes from question and answer. So that's the wise kid. Interestingly, the child after that is the Rasha. Now the Rasha as well has questions. So you would have thought, well, he's wise as well. Why is he a Rasha? So the rabbis tell us very clearly that child, however, is considered a Rasha because his questioning is not one of curiosity, not one of wanting to know. It's not a curious type of questioning. So why do we do this? His questioning is cynical. He's cynical. And he says, what is ma avodah zot lachem? What is this avodah you people are doing? Why are you eating matzah? Why are you eating maror? Why are you involved in this stuff? This is so antiquated. It's so old. It's so 2, 4, 4, 8. We're 5, 7, 8, 4. What are you doing over here? So that is the Rasha. And we're told you have to bring him down a step or two. But we answer him. We give him an answer as well. We do say that had you been in Mitzrayim, you would not have got out. With that kind of attitude, you would never have left Egypt. Why? There were people who never left Egypt? Yeah. We know from Rashi that 20% of the Jewish people never left. Right? Sorry. 80% never left. Only 20%. Chamushim yalu. Only 20% left. That's 80% did not actually leave. So they became Jewish? No, because we became Jewish 50 days later at Har Sinai. So they never were Jewish. They have ancestral blood that we're connected to them, but then they did not become part of the Jewish people. So we're like, that kind of attitude, it's never going to work. So to make a difference, it's good to question, and it's good to even be skeptical. Skeptical is good. Questioning is good. But cynical is not good. Cynical is, what are you doing over here? You're poo-pooing it. Right? Get out of here. After the Rasha comes the Tam, the simple child. And that simple kid is there. You know, when I was a kid, we used to have these old Haggadot with drawings. Now we have like 5,000 Haggadot. Right? Every rabbi comes out with their own Haggadah, you know what I'm saying, with their own commentary. It used to be, we used to have one Haggadah, which I grew up, and there was like these old drawings. I think they came from Germany in the early 1900s, you know? Nowadays they have, you know, the Rasha is there with his, you know, his piercings, you know, and his, you know, green bluish hair, and he's unwashed. You know what I'm saying? That's how they got. Back then he was seen as like, you know, this German aristocracy who just like kind of like gave up all of Judaism. The Talmud was seen as like this senseless child. Okay? This type of child, however, has questions, but his question is so simplistic. It's mazot. What is this? What are we doing over here? You know? And we answer that child as well. Ma matzah? Why matzah? What's maror? And we answer that child very respectfully because this child wants to know. They just literally know nothing. They grew up with nothing and they know nothing. We need to answer them at their level as well. So that is the Tam. And finally, we have the fourth child that we need to engage at the Pesach Seder, and that is the Eno Yodeh Lishol. This child doesn't even know how to ask questions. So this actually is a decline. It starts with the Chacham, goes down to the Rasha, then we go to the Tam, but actually, potentially the worst of all four is the one who doesn't even know you should ask questions. They're just barely there. They're just hanging on by the skin of their teeth, not knowing anything at all. And they just say, so what do you do with that kid? He hasn't even got any questions. He's so far divorced from anything Jewish, or any form of connection to Torah mitzvot. So apatachlo, you feed him questions. You feed this kid questions, because you should be asking this question, and then you answer it. So he's there. There's a famous question about why is there no fifth son? Why is there no fifth son? Right? A very famous question. That was actually a book called The Fifth Son by some Hollywood writer, I think. I remember his name. Oh, I have it at home somewhere. Or maybe I lent it out. So he says, why is there no fifth son? So the Lubavitch Rebbe, Zecher Tzedek Levracha, said, let me explain to you what this is about. And he says the following. He says, the 4 sons are actually 4 generations. Listen carefully, this is an amazing idea. The 4 sons at the Pesach Seder, the Chacham, the wise son, the Rasha, the bad son, the Tam, the simple one, and Eno Yodeh Lishol, the one who doesn't know how to ask any questions. These are actually 4 generations. Great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and son. Or great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, and daughter. It makes a difference. These are 4 types of children, how we engage them by making them ask questions. So he says, you're actually seeing here the decline of generations, the Yuridot Hadorot, he says. Basically, it starts with the great-grandfather being the Chacham, right? And most people speak to today who identify as Jewish will tell you that their great-grandfather or great-grandmother was a religious person. If they're Sephardi, he was always the rabbi. Every Sephardi, back in Yemen, my great-grandfather was the Chacham, back in Persia, back in Tunisia, back in Jerba, back in Syria, back in Aleppo. Everyone was great, back in Europe, he was so religious. Always is that way. Everyone who identifies as Jewish today, even identifies, has got a great-grandparent, at least one out of all of them, who was like, they were so religious. Always. I've seen people who are so secular they knew nothing at all. They'll show you a photo of their great-grandfather, right? They got one, oh my God. This is like out of the Gemara. What happens? How did we get this decline? Well, a lot of it's not their fault. There's a lot of expulsions, genocides, Holocaust. There's a lot of challenges that came with it. You get into a new country, they have to work, they got to get a job, they forget a lot of it. So that's the that's the Rasha. The next generation kind of rebels against his father. He says, I'm out. I'm not interested. So antiquated, who needs all this stuff? Mazor lachem. What are you doing? I'm not part of this. It's lachem, it's your stuff, it's not my stuff. So he leaves and he's not part of it. What comes after him? After him comes the simple one. Why is he simple? Because his father had a Jewish education. He was the Rasha, if you remember. But he remembers his grandfather, so he knows what's going on. So his father didn't teach him anything because he excluded himself. But the grandson, who's the Tam, because we're following the 3-generational line now, he says, because I remember my grandfather did this for me. And I'll say, my grandfather did this, my grandfather did that, I have people always come to me in a class and go, my grandmother would love you. Right? She would love your classes. I'm like, what about your parents? What about you? Nah, they're not interested. It's always the grandparents. I'm like, I respect your grandparents, but I want to see you and your kids coming. So that already is the Tam. Because if he didn't restart it, but he remembers his grandfather, so he's still connected. He knows matzah because he saw matzah on his grandmother's table. You get it? Now you get to the next generation. That's the 4th generation. That is the Enu de Lishol. This is the kid. Most people do not remember their great-grandparent, who in this case is the Chacham. They remember their grandfather, but they know that he rebelled. He was out of it. He completely got to the new country, whether it was came to America. He's like, not for me, I'm out of here. His father was a Tam, so he didn't know what was going on. Right? So he's got to hear from his father, the Tam, stories about his great-grandfather. You see the decline in generations as you get further and further away from the initial point. So he's complete. So with that kid, we have to reintroduce and say, listen, there's something going on over here. But at least this child is at the Pesach Seder. I mean, they're present. They're there. You have a chance. The 5th son, however, doesn't exist. They're not in the Haggadah. Why not? Because they're gone. Once you get through the 4 generations and they're not at the Pesach Seder, they're out, right? They're in, Alabama, they're in Afghanistan, I don't know where they are, right? They're completely gone. So happens to be the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? Although I'm not Lubavitcher, but he was an incredible individual and I learned so much from his writings and teachings. He said that's why we have to go out, find the 5th son, and schlep them to the Pesach Seder. So we always talk about, I just mentioned this a moment ago to the rabbi over here, we always talk about how we have to welcome ani and poor people to our table. Halach ma'anya. Okay, you have to bring them to the table and we should do something, whether we should support them financially or actually have them Pesach Seder. But nowadays, Baruch Hashem, most Jewish people, although they're still poor people, they have a basic income. They have, what to do. Baruch Hashem, we're at that stage of history. Not all of them, be clear. Still an obligation to give, food and sustenance to poor people among our nation. However, this poor people also involves people who are ignorant. We have an obligation to teach. So I always say that try to have someone who doesn't have somewhere to go for Pesach Seder or give them direction to get something. But there are people who don't know anything at all about Torah mitzvot. What do you do about them? You've got to bring them into your table and you've got to teach them. That person is also they also are lacking spiritual Torah sustenance. You've got to find a way to get them to a Pesach Seder. I personally run, for many, many years, a communal Seder for many, many people. And there's people there who will do some semblance of a Pesach Seder at home, I guess. But they come to Pesach Seder because they don't know how to read the language. Or whether we said already that the Pesach Seder is a sipur, it's a story. So you can do it in any language you want. You've got to tell the story. That's what you've got to do. You've got to read that. It's all there for you in black and white. You know what I'm saying? You've got to read it over. But they don't know how to engage. So I buy all this paraphernalia. I buy the plastic frogs and I dress up as Paro. And we engage the people. Right? You've got to do that. And this is an ancient tradition, by the way. We shouldn't just, poo-poo it. Rabbi Akiva, in the Gemara, it tells us, used to, get ready for this, used to buy little treats for his children or for other children who would come to the Pesach Seder. He would give them egozim, little nuts as a treat. Now, in 2024, if you give, your kids nuts, you are nuts, right? It's not going to work. You've got to give them a little bit more than that. So I actually bought 50 fake dollar bills, which pretty much cost me the price of a real. And then I said, get this, and then if you answer questions, you can come drink Chol HaMoed, I'll give you a real dollar, You've got to find ways to engage the people who are present. This is very, very important. This is the time we need to engage our children. Give them a way to engage in the story. And a lot of what we do actually wraps around this mitzvah. Why Pesach? Why this time of year specifically are we focusing on children? That's a very fair question. So there's many answers to this question, okay? Why not at the sukkah? We don't say keep the kids up, right? Keep the 3-year-old up to ask him questions, give him treats at the sukkah. We don't do this, very, very nice. But it's a Pesach thing. Why Pesach? Why the Pesach Seder? So the basic answer is because this is the beginning of the Jewish people. This is our outbreak story. We became the Jewish people. This is where it happened. If you can't give people their history, where we started, you can't give them a national history, you know what I'm saying, then forget about it. You're not going to get anywhere else. This is where we were. We were slaves, and you've got to talk to them. We were slaves in Egypt. Mitzrayim, the Egyptians came to hit us. Hashem took us out. You've got to explain to them at their level, whether it's 5 or 50. This is our start. This is our genesis as a nation. And everything changes from this point on. So kids have to be aware of that. They've got to feel the connection to that. If you can make them proud, this is really the proud Jewish holiday. This is the way it's got to be. And actually the entire Pesach Seder is full of really weird stuff that we do in order to engage kids. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about karpas. Karpas. What is this karpas? Why do we begin the Pesach Seder with this strange vegetable, which is actually a machloket, by the way, what vegetable constitutes karpas anyway? And we take it and we dip it. We dip it into salt water. Do we do that during the year? No. Suddenly we're doing it. Usually we don't dip once, now we're dipping twice. What are we dipping twice, by the way? What is the dipping twice? So there's 2 dippings at the Pesach Seder. One is the karpas into the salt water. The other dipping is the maror into the charoset, take the edge off the bitterness. This relates to dippings that came many, many years before. What 2 dippings do these 2 dippings that Pesach Seder come keneged? So we know that when the brothers sold Yosef to Egypt, they took his beautiful, lovely kotonet pasim, which is related to the word karpas, and they dipped it in goat blood and showed it to their father and said, oh, we don't know what happened to him, we think he's dead. Okay? So that's one dipping we have to be mechaper for. There's actually another dipping, which is a good dipping, which is when we were in Egypt, we took hyssop, this plant, and we dipped into the blood of the Korban Pesach, and we put the blood on the inside of the house, on the mezuzot, on the doorpost, which is actually a future remiss to the future mezuzot that we're going to put our Shema on in the future, right? That's why it's called Shaddai, the name of Hashem that we use over there, because it's Shomer Dalatoj Yisrael. God is the defender and the guardian of the Jewish doors. The mezuzah mitzvah is actually a manifestation of this initial putting of the thing. So these 2 dippings of the Pesach Seder come to. So why are we mentioning Yosef? What's he doing at the Pesach Seder? How does he get such a big mention? Well, he was the first one to be sold into slavery and go down to Egypt. And when that happened, it was terrible. He was miserable. He's disconnected from his family. His brothers spoke bad about him, pretended he was dead. He had spoken Lashon Hara about his brothers, right? And therefore he was sold, because Lashon Hara equals galut. We know that. Speaking bad, evil, and gossiping about other people leads to galut, or keeps us in galut. We know that. So he's sold out. So he's the first one who ends up in Mitzrayim. So it all starts with him. So we start with him. And we do this weird thing of dipping it into stuff which you don't normally dip vegetables into stuff. By the way, karpas, there's 2 opinions what it actually is. In the Gemara Mishnah, it's not called karpas. I think it's called yerek, the green vegetable. The green vegetable has to be hadama. We'll see why later on. Has to be hadama. It's a green vegetable. So we see karpas come much later. So the Maril and others say, well, what is karpas then? So there's 2 opinions. One is petrozilia, parsley. And the other is, what's karpas? What's karafs in Persian? Celery. The Persian word for celery is karpas, same word, right? So it seems like celery, and by the way, of the two, if you have a choice, you should probably actually use celery. We have a tradition, that's what it is. Now, many Ashkenazim, like my wife, will use another root vegetable, like a potato. Why is that? Because that's all they had back in Europe, right? For you, if you had a potato, you were loaded. You were like, you were king of the hill, right? No one could beat you, right? Potatoes were like everything. We know that, half of Ireland, starved to death because of potato famine. This was what it was like, right? You were eating it, you're making alcohol from it, they were doing everything with it. Any root vegetable works. I read once, I can't remember where, but I know it's been written somewhere, that this is part of it. It has to be, why a root vegetable? Well, we need to make a hadama on it, because we're not going to make a hadama on the maros. We have to have that in mind to cover it. That's one reason. But actually they say because a root is really who we are. We started deep under, right? You look at a carrot, for example, in the vegetables. Above you see the leaf, but really the goodness is underneath. That's how we started in Mitzrayim. Makes sense. All right? We're like the root vegetable, and eventually we're low, and eventually we come out, and you see all the goodness was there all along. It's like the Jewish people in Mitzrayim. Started us low, and then Baruch Hashem took us out. I think that's one of the reasons it's a root vegetable, because there are other hadamot that are not root vegetables. I guess like strawberry, I guess, you know what I'm saying? Right? Or a cucumber. But that we don't use. It's a root vegetable has become the tradition when it comes to karapas. So we do that. But another reason we do this, we dip it. Well, also because it used to be in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, when you ate vegetables that were dipped in water, that we're going to do into the water, you had to wash your hands beforehand. We don't do that anymore. So we do it at the Pesach Seder to make it look weird. Why? To elicit questions from our kids. And it's tough, right? Because usually you say, Ana Telit Yadayim when you wash your hands. But you're going to wash, and by the way, when you wash your hands for the karpas, you do it as you would for a motzi, but without a baracha. It's very weird, and the kids freak out. They're not used to it, right? People are used to washing their hands for hamotzi, which you're going to do later on for the matzah. They're like, you still can't speak. It's still hesach hadat. Unless you are Yemenite and follow the Rambam, then you can speak. But most of us, we cannot speak. And we go from there, make a dama. And it's actually got to be a little bit, like a little kazayit. Less than kazayit. You don't need an after bracha. I know people like Hungary, they want to start shoving celery and, parsley in their mouth. You should take just a little tiny bit. Otherwise you have to do an after bracha, and you want this to last to the maror, later on, which is after you wash your hands. So, for bread. So it's a little complicated, but that's pretty much what that's all about. There's a halachic basis for doing it, and I know everyone wants to fress on it, right? But just a little bite, less than kazayit. Sometimes you want to figure out, how to fulfill kazayit and eat a lot. Now you got to figure out what a kazayit is to eat less. And this is much harder, right? Because kazayit is actually where it's worth like kazayit, like an olive's worth, or even the stone in. That's how much you have to eat. I know they have these big, picture boards that Feldheim brings out of how much matzah you have to eat. Personally, I don't get it. Even if you crush the matzah, it's getting up. Even half a matzah, they tell you it's going to end up like a ball over here, right? Once you even get the air out, and there's not too much air in matzah. It's like a piece of cardboard, right? But still, just a little fraction. So to be yot to the mitzvah, you have to have a good mouthful. Okay? So when it comes to the karpas, just a little bit. So we do weird stuff there as well. Another thing we do, which is very weird, the
entire thing is weird.
Yeah, the whole thing is meant to be, it's very, very unusual. It's a very strange sequence of events. I mean, do we teach our children to steal? I hope not. I hope that's not what we do. We do not teach our kids to steal. Don't tell me your stories, I don't want to know, guys. But we don't teach our kids to steal, and yet, comes the Pesach Seder, and we're teaching our kids that whether we steal the afikoman and hide it, or they come and hide it. Right, by the way, I highly recommend you don't have your kids hide the afikoman, because many times the kids fall asleep because it's very late by the time you eat it, and then you can't find it. You've got to wake them up in order to get hold of it. I've been there a couple of times. You don't want to do it. So it's better you hide it and make them search for it and give them a prize. That's what I do at my sedarim, okay? I hide it. Yeah, it's like a game. You're playing games with them. This is very traditional. And the Gemara says, Chatifa, you grab it, you hide it, you do this, you hide it from them. All this is there, again, once again, to keep your kids awake, okay? This is what it's all about. It's to engage them and keep them interested, to keep them up. But I always say the most favorite part of every Jewish male at the Pesach Seder is karate chopping the afikoman, right? The middle matzah, and give it a right down the middle, try to make a shape out of it, try to do a yud and a vav or a dal, I can't remember exactly. You cut it, cut it apart, right? It feels good. Right? How often do you get to and then, but what do? We hide the larger piece as the afikoman. There's actually the word afikoman is actually Greek, it's not even Hebrew, from the word epikumen. It means dessert. For dessert, we have matzah. So we begin with matzah, and we end with the matzah. The matzah at the beginning is the matzah of lechem oni, slave food. The matzah at the end of the Pesach Seder is lechem of chirut, of free, because now we're free. By the end of the Pesach Seder, you're free. So the same matzah represents avdut, slavery, and chirut, and freedom. You can have one symbol that signifies both. And here with the matzah, it does. Right? Because we left free people with matzot on our back. Okay? So that's what the matzah. Now the matzah of the afikoman actually represents something else, and that's the korban pesach. We don't eat the korban pesach nowadays. We're not purified. Okay? We can't do it. However, what we do is we eat this afikoman lezecher korban. That's why you cannot eat any more food after eating the afikoman. The taste of the korban pesach had to remain in the mouths of the people, so they had the taste of it. So we have the taste of the afikoman, the matzah of the afikoman, in our mouths after. That's what we're meant to be doing. You are allowed to drink 2 more cups of wine, and you can have coffee or tea. They say that you're allowed to do, and water. But you should have anything else food-wise. It should be the last taste that lingers on your mouth. Zecha the korban. So make sure you don't eat the afikoman before you eat your main course, because then you're done. And there ain't no main course for you. So time yourselves very, very well before you go hunting for your afikoman, because epikumen, it is actually meant to be your dessert. Okay, I know it sounds weird, having matzah for dessert, but that's the reason. Right, so the taste lingers in your mouth afterwards. Okay?
Quick question. If there's no kids on the table, which happens, what do you do? Do you hide the afikoman?
Great question. Actually, I'll ask an even better question. Let's say there's no, who's going to say the manishtana? So the youngest person there asks the questions. So for example, there's a 99-year-old and a 98-year-old. The 98-year-old says, manishtana halayla, right? And the other one answers them and says, the paragraph afterwards, and says, this is what happened to our ancestors. And they answer. Let's say, so that it goes with the youngest person, that because let's say a person's by themselves, which is very sad, but let's say what to happen. The Gemara says they ask the question themselves, they answer their own question. Even they have to ask the questions. See, a person by themselves, they're stuck somewhere, manishtana, and they answer their own questions. So if Higarat Lebincha doesn't just mean children, you're allowed to fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur, Yitzim Mitzrayim, the story of Yitzim Mitzrayim, without there being a child even present. That's sufficient and that's good enough. Yeah? All right. Any other thoughts, questions? So we did the Arba Banim, we did Karpas, we did a little bit of afikoman. Yeah.
How much wine do you drink on the Pesach?
Great question. So me, I'm not a big drinker. I'll be honest with you. I'm a bit lame. You have to first. Your cup has to be full. Okay, and the mitzvah is to down the entire. Usually, you have malol lugma, a cheek full, but here you have to actually drink the entire, because each one of the cups represents a different geula. You should drink the entire thing. Therefore, my dear friends, you should definitely make sure that the cup you have is small, a minimum of 3.3 or 3.5 ounces. So that's 3.5 shot glasses. So the cup should be small. If you use a big cup, you've got to fill it, you've got to drink the entire thing. If you can't drink the entire thing, you should actually drink rov kos. The first cup at least, you should drink all of it, and it should be red wine. By the end of the Pesach Seder, you should be a little bit, tipsy. That's red grape juice works. If you don't want to take wine, grape juice absolutely works. It's better to do wine. At least the first cup. I start to, because I'm speaking the whole night, I can't get wasted, so I have to mix grape juice in with my wine just to, but the first one you should try to do, and you should down the entire thing. So a minimum of 3.5 ounces in order to get a reviyit, right? The reviyit is about 3/4 of a plastic cup, is the right size for each one of them. That's what it should be, and it should be rinsed out with some water in between each one of the daled kosot. That's what you should do. So there's a lot of technical stuff happening there. And by the way, nowadays the Haggadot that we use have all the rules inside them, just to follow the English inside, and you're good to go.
Yeah, so afikoman is the last food that you can have.
Yes.
But you can have drinks after.
Yes.
What about like a milkshake or like a mousse?
No.
Because it's not.
No, no other flavor, no milkshake. Well, how can you have a milkshake? You just had meat at your Pesach Seder.
There's a vegan meat milkshake.
No. That is not considered a liquid, that's considered a food. You should not be having anything like that. The last stage you can have a cup of tea. That you can have. Maybe coffee just to keep you up a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Smoothie.
I don't think so.
No?
I would not permit such a thing. You have to ask your SLOR, your Sephardic local Orthodox rabbi, to make sure. That's pretty much it.